If you're using a flash to shoot portraits outdoors, the most common way to do that is using an ND filter. But if you search online, you're gonna find a ton of different types of ND filters. You're gonna find regular ND filters, variable ND filters, clip-in ND filters, ND gels. You're gonna find all different types. So in this video, I'm gonna introduce you to the most popular types of ND filters to use when you're shooting outdoors, shooting wide open with a flash. All right, welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, my name is Miguel Quiles. I'm a Sony ambassador. I've been doing flash photography pretty much my entire life. And if you've seen some of my other flash tutorials on this channel, the face here next to me is probably very familiar. This is Caitlin. I'll have her information linked in the description, so be sure to check that out afterwards. But when it comes to shooting with ND filters, there's a lot of different types out there. And two of the most common and the most popular that you're gonna find is using something like this. This is a variable ND filter. A lot of different companies make that type of filter. This one's made by Tilta. And then there's also this guy, which has become, we flip this around, it's become increasingly more popular over, I don't know, the last few years. These filters are made by Case. There's another brand, I believe it's called Colaris. Could be totally butchering that name. But they also do these ND filters that are drop-in filters that go over the top of the camera sensor. And essentially they do the same type of thing. And what is that same type of thing? Let's talk about what these ND filters do with a flash. So I have a bunch of videos here on my channel talking about shooting with a flash outdoors. The big problem that you run into when you're trying to use a flash outdoors is that you are limited by how fast you can go with your shutter speed on your camera. And essentially the shutter speed allows you to control the exposure of your ambient light. So think of your trees in the background, the sky. All of those different things are actually controlled by a combination of things, but mostly the shutter speed. What ends up happening is as soon as you put a trigger on your camera, you are limited by how fast of a shutter speed you could use. So I'm actually using the Alpha 9 III, which has a much higher sync speed with flash. But generally speaking, most cameras will have from 1/160th of a second to 1/250th of a second. That's kind of the standard range for being able to use a flash off camera with your camera. Now, in these types of situations, we're shooting towards the end of the day. There's a lot of bright light out here. If you're shooting outdoors, you're gonna need a much faster shutter speed than that in order to kind of knock down the ambient exposure. And what ends up happening is you can't do that. Like unless you have a flash and a trigger that works with a feature called high speed sync, which I have videos on my channel. I'll link it up in the card above for you to check out. If you use high speed sync, now you could actually go all the way up to whatever the max is on your camera, typically 1/6000th to 1/8000th of a second. But the way the flash operates is completely different with high speed sync. I'm not gonna go into it right now. Just understand that with high speed sync, you're getting half of the amount of full power that you can get from a typical flash. And generally speaking, it's not enough for most outdoor, like really bright environments, unless you have a more powerful flash. So the other way you can get around that is using ND filters. And so hopefully we've caught up now with why you need the ND filter. It's to basically allow you to be at the max flash sync speed of your camera. Again, anywhere from 1/160 to 1/250th of a second. And now, instead of having to use your shutter speed to bring down this ambient light, we can use our ND filters. And that's gonna darken the entire exposure, and it's gonna allow us to use the full power of our flash. All right, so the first one we're gonna talk about is the variable ND filter. And there's a lot of different variations of this. I'm actually using the one from Tilta, and I love this variable ND for a few reasons. First one being that this specific one, it's just one filter, but it does anywhere from 1 to 10 stops of ND. So you can see you can go super, super dark and pretty much anywhere in between. And what's great about this one as well is that with this specific variable ND filter, you could dial it into taste. So obviously with the amount of light that we have right now, I might be somewhere around like an ND6, ND7 to be able to bring the exposure down. But if we're shooting in the middle of the day, you might actually need to be maybe a little bit higher than that. If you're shooting later in the day, you're trying to shoot wide open at like f1.2, maybe you need ND2 or ND3. And what's great is you don't have to use multiple filters. You have all of those different grades of ND all in one very small compact filter. What's great with this Tilta setup as well, typically when you buy variable NDs, like the one that right now there's on the video camera that we're using, there's a variable ND, but it's a screw-on variable ND. So those are cool as well. You could just kind of screw those onto the front of the lens. But what ends up happening is you can't use a lens hood on your lens if you're using most variable ND filters. This specific one, this is made by Tilta. This is called the Mirage. And what's great about this is you could take your variable ND and it just drops into the slot. And so this allows me to have a hood and actually have a variable ND at the same time. The other thing too is this specific one has an extra slot. Tilta happens to make a bunch of different effects filters. So there's, you know, black mist, pro mist, perla mist, all these different filters that give kind of cool effects, and you could drop that in there. So you could have variable ND and a effects filter, and you're doing it all in the same matte box, which is pretty cool. What's also nice about this is you could buy, this Mirage kit comes with these adapters, and I believe it comes with 4 out of the box, but they cover the most common sizes that you would have for lenses. So it's got 67, 72, 77, and 82. However, I have some other lenses. One is an 86. They make it in 86. They make it in 62 millimeter. Essentially, whatever lens it is that you have, it will tell you on the lens what size filter it would accept. You could buy these little adapters for $6 to $10. I'm not sure exactly how much they are, but I'll link them in the description. And you just buy these, and then you could use this one hood system with all of your lenses. Most variable NDs that you would buy would be like this, and they would have the variable ND property to it. And one of the big reasons why I tend to like this specific one is that you would normally end up having to buy a bigger filter, like maybe I don't know, an 82 millimeter filter, and then you would buy different rings that would bring it down to the size of your specific lens. So let's just say, for example, this is a 72. You can get an 82 millimeter variable ND filter, and then you could drop it down with one of these rings to 72, which is what I have on this. This is the Sony 50 millimeter f1.2, by the way. And so you could do that to basically make that filter fit this smaller lens. But what ends up happening is you're going to see, when you search for variable ND filters, you're going to find that the prices are crazy. Like, you'll see a variable ND filter for $20 or $30, and then you'll see one for like $300 or $400. Like in the case of this Mirage kit, I want to say this thing is $349 or something at the time of shooting. Again, I've got the links for all this in the description of the video, but so $300 for a variable ND. So they range in price. So that brings me to, what is the downside of the variable ND? First and foremost, if you get some of the cheaper variable NDs, it will change the color of your video or of your photos. So that's something you're gonna have to correct in post. Some of them tend to make your photos a little bit more yellow. Just depends on the quality of the filter that you buy. The higher quality filter, VND or variable ND, that you buy, the less it will impact the colors of your photographs. The other thing is that because essentially these variable NDs are two polarizer filters that are kind of moving, what ends up happening is some of the cheaper filters actually create an X pattern on your photographs or on your video, depending on how you're using these filters. So depending on, as you're adjusting from, let's say if it's a 1 to 5 stop ND filter, as you're adjusting from 1 to 5 stops, you might see that cross pattern, and it looks like, I don't know, maybe I'll find a picture online and throw it up here on the screen for you, but essentially it creates this little X pattern of contrast on your photograph, and it just ruins it. It makes it to where, let's say if it comes up at the 3 stop point on your VND filter, you can't really use that. You'd have to like maybe use 4 or use 2. You'd have to adjust it to basically get rid of it, and it's super, super annoying. The other thing you have to consider with VND filters when you're shooting, and this really comes into play when you're shooting with a DSLR, a little less on some of the newer mirrorless cameras, but when you're trying to focus with a variable ND filter that's on top of your lens, oftentimes the autofocus will have a little bit of a harder time to focus correctly. So you do want to make sure that as you're shooting with a variable ND filter, you're punching into those photographs. Make sure that your photos, the eyes are coming out tack sharp and in focus, because it's very possible that if you're shooting with this VND, and especially if you're on a DSLR, it's really hard for the camera to actually focus correctly through that dark piece of glass. So that's the variable ND filter. Let's talk about using the drop-in filters like the ones that we're using from Case. So let's talk about the next type of filter that you could buy, and these are the drop-in sensor filters. These are actually made by Case, and there's some kind of cool things with these. These you could actually just place over the top of your camera sensor, and this specific one I have in my hand is an ND64. I have an ND8 and an ND1000 in this specific kit. You can see they come pretty small. They have some other filters as well, like special effects filters that you can get for this. Now, I guess now is probably a good time to say, I'll probably put this somewhere in the beginning of the video too, but this video is not sponsored by anyone. All of these filters I bought with my own money. So this isn't like a promotion for any of these brands. You could choose to use whatever ND filters it is that you like, but these are the ones that I personally own and that I have purchased and that I use in my day-to-day work. Love the ones from Tilta, love the ones from Case, but there are some other filters that are very similar in how they function. Now, what's great about these filters is that they just go over the top of your camera sensor, which is very simple, very easy. You don't have to buy a bunch of different adapter rings to adapt it to the specific lens that you're trying to use. Generally speaking, these high quality filters tend to have a little bit less color cast as well, because you're not actually adjusting the amount of ND. It's just a set amount. You've got an ND64, what was it, ND8 and an ND1000, and I'm sure they have some other NDs in that lineup as well. This just happens to be the ones that I own. So you do have that as an advantage to these specific filters, is you just put it over the sensor, very little, if any, color cast. And the other thing is too, that you could actually have your lens with the actual lens hood over the top of it, so that can help you to prevent, you know, stray light getting into your shots as well. So it's another thing to consider. Now on the downsides, all right, with these, they're a little bit tricky, right? Because you got to take the lens off, your sensor is exposed. If you're shooting with a mirrorless camera, I'm using the Alpha 9 III. You got the sensor wide open to the elements. So this is something that you want to be very careful. Obviously, if I was shooting dirt bikes and stuff like that, I probably wouldn't be using these filters, right? Because I'm going to get a whole bunch of random dust and crap into the inside of my camera. We don't want to do that. But that's one of the things that you have to kind of deal with, is the fact that, you know, while you're swapping these filters out, you might introduce pollutants into the inside of your camera. So you want to be super careful when you're putting these things on. Try your best if you can put it inside of your bag and try to protect the camera from getting any kind of dust or something on the inside, and then drop the filters on there. You should be good to go. But really, other than that, I mean, there's very few kind of disadvantages to using these. They're a little bit weird and finicky to just handle and handhold. Because they are so small and they're so like compact and light, there is a possibility that you might drop this because it's just tiny, right? The other thing too, which I guess is kind of a downside, is that these are not variable, right? They are fixed stop ND filters. And so what'll end up happening is you might actually not need ND64. Maybe you need ND32, right? And if you don't have an ND32, then you kind of have to play with your settings to basically get the shot that you're trying to get. A VND, you could just kind of tune it to taste, but then you have the downsides that we've been talking about, like not being able to use lens hoods, color cast, having to have a bunch of different adapters. There's pros and cons to this stuff, right? And that's why I'm making this video and trying to introduce these things to you. But there are many situations where these Case filters are actually pretty awesome. Typically what I end up doing is getting like the ND64, putting that on my camera, and if I'm using it outside of a midday scenario, I could shoot at f1.4, I could shoot at f1.2, which I'm going to do when we start shooting Caitlin. You could use that and it's mostly fine. It's just that when that's not enough, that's when it becomes a little bit of a problem, because there's not a gradual step up and down. It's a pretty big step up. You'll go from like a 2-stop to like a 5-stop, and maybe 3 would have been perfect. So these are the drop-in filters. There's a few other bonus filters that I'm going to talk about here momentarily, but we're going to do a shoot with each of these filters so you can see the results and you can see which one you like best. So let's talk about how we use these filters in an actual shooting situation. Once again, we've got Caitlin here. We're going to start off with the variable ND filter from Tilta, and I'm going to show you how I build this thing up, okay? So first and foremost, we talked about the shutter speed. The shutter speed needs to be below the flash sync speed limit, which in this case, I'm going to go to 1/250th of a second because most cameras, that's the limit that you can get to. For those astute viewers out there who are like, oh, but Miguel, you have Alpha 9.3, it goes higher. Don't worry about all that, okay? This specific camera does go higher. This one actually goes up to 1/80,000th of a second, right? But who's counting that? All right, 1/250th of a second. We're gonna dial that in. I'm shooting with that 50mm f1.2. So I'm gonna shoot wide open at f1.2. And I'm using the lowest ISO, which in this case, the base ISO is 250. Your camera might be 100, it might be 200, whatever the base is, just dial in the base exposure and you're good. You're gonna see that in this case, I've got the ND filter on here. If I was to take this thing off, let's take it off completely. And I'm gonna take a photograph here so you could see what this exposure looks like without anything on it, right? So f1.2, 1/250th of a second, ISO 250, we have a light grenade, right? Now again, if we were shooting natural light, it wouldn't be a problem. We could just raise up the shutter speed to 1/8000 or whatever it is. We could knock down the entire exposure and we could use the natural light. But what's amazing with a flash is that we have complete control of the exposure of our subject or subjects if there's multiple, and the exposure of the background. So that's where we're going to introduce this variable ND filter. So we'll just take this one. We'll drop this bad boy like that. And so now, if I was to take this photo, this is at 1 stop. It's not going to be enough. And this is with the flash off. I'm going to introduce the flash here momentarily, but we're just going to dial in this variable ND filter, and I'm just looking at that background and trying to get a nice exposure. And so here it is. We'll put this photograph on the screen here for you to see. This is the shot. Again, the settings haven't changed. All we did was just drop that variable ND filter. And I'm primarily looking at the background to see how bright it is and just trying to bring down that exposure. We could even go super dark. I'll go to that 10 stop. We'll throw that on the screen. So 10 stop ND filter just pretty much crushes all the light that's in this shot. But we don't really need to do that. We could be somewhere in this ballpark here. And we're getting a nice exposure on the background. But Caitlin, unfortunately, is kind of in shadow. She's pretty dark. But the good thing is that's where you bring your flash into this environment and you could actually control the exposure of your model or your subject separately from the rest of the environment. So let's talk about our lights and let's dial that in to make it look perfect. So for the light for this shoot, I'm using the Godox AD200 Pro 2. And again, all of the products I'm using are going to be in the description of this video. Very powerful 200 watt strobe. I'm firing that with the Godox X3S. I have a video on my YouTube channel talking about this trigger. Absolutely love the trigger. Super easy to use, very compact. And I'm actually using it with one of my favorite modifiers to shoot just in general. This is the Magmod Beauty Dish. And again, I have a video. It might be up by the time you see this video, but if not, I'll post it up afterwards. Fantastic beauty dish, great for shooting outdoors in harsh light. And it's highly modifiable, if that's a word, which is really great. So that's what we're using for the lights for all of these portraits. And again, we're gonna tune this light to taste to basically just expose for Caitlin, because that variable ND filter is gonna help us to just bring the ambient light down to where we need it to be. So let's start shooting with the variable ND with this flash and let's see what we get. All right, so once again, f1.2, 1/250th of a second, ISO 250 with the Tilta variable ND. Now we have our Godox flash turned on. Bonus tip for you if you're shooting with off-camera flash outdoors, just fire off that test button once or twice to make sure that your trigger and your flash is actually connected and it's working. The worst possible thing you could do is put this camera up to your face thinking everything is good, and you take that first photo, flash doesn't go off, you look like you don't know what you're doing. Don't do that. Just fire off that test shot. If it goes off, 99% of the time, you're pretty much good to go. So now that we have the flash turned on, we'll take this shot here. And this first shot here is taken at a quarter power and about 3/10 of a stop. And it's a little tiny bit bright for me. The exposure on Caitlin is a bit bright. So I'm gonna adjust the power down to 1/8, and we'll take this shot here. All right, now at 1/8 power, this is looking pretty good. Very nice. And you can see it's super easy. We had that base exposure in camera with our camera settings to basically dial down the exposure of the background. Now with the flash, I'm able to place it where I want. You can use whatever modifier you want to use. I like beauty dishes in these environments. And now I could just basically light Caitlin and make her look amazing. So that's using the variable ND filter. All right, so let's put on our ND filters here, the sensor. And I'm doing this the way that you shouldn't do it, which is just leaving it exposed wide open, but just for the sake of the video. So you're gonna take this filter, very carefully place it, drop it in, looks just like that. Take your lens, boom, there you go. Now, I left my ND filter back at the studio, or sorry, my hood back at the studio. If I had it, I could basically use my hood where if you're not using something like that matte box from Tilta, you wouldn't have access to being able to use a hood. So we've got this ND64 that's put in front of the sensor. Let's go ahead and take some shots. All right, so our settings haven't changed. I literally just fired off the shot, left it exactly the same as it was for the variable ND. And in this case, it actually is fine. The output of the flash is pretty good. And once again, we've got nice blue skies. You can see detail in the background. I'm shooting these in RAW. And so one of the big benefits to being able to shoot in RAW is that if the background is a little bit too dark, it actually just boosts it up in post. I would much rather underexpose the ambient light than to overexpose it, because it's a little harder to recover those highlights when you're shooting digital. But in this case, it's a nice kind of balance. The clouds in this case are a little bit overexposed using the variable ND. But what I'm finding is if I bring up the power, I could take this ND64 out and put the ND1000 and it will darken everything. The challenge is going to be that I start to lose the detail in the trees and all of that. And I don't, from a creative perspective, I don't want to do that. So the ND64 gives me a nice balance where it's kind of bringing down the exposure of the trees, brings down the exposure of the blue sky. Some of the white clouds are going to be lost, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. I think these look great. All right, so that's all of the different types of NDs that I use for my portrait photography work. Let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. And if you have one that you've been using for a while, let us all know in the comments section. I love the fact that here on this channel, we have a great community of people who love portrait photography, love using flash in their work. Let's make everyone better at this flash photography game and share the knowledge that we have. Be sure to follow Caitlin as well. She's got awesome work on her portfolio, and you'll see her here on this channel quite a bit. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And listen, I have a bunch of really great videos, but the video that you see here on the screen is one that I think would be a great follow-up to this video. Be sure to check it out, and I'll see you there.